Hello, everyone. This is Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish podcast, Walking with Our Shadow, where we share ancient indigenous teachings of remembrance, all so we can walk and learn how to walk a path of radical self-love. It's with gratitude, grace, mercy, and compassion, and excitement that we welcome into the circle today, Malu-Kanoa. Welcome, Malu.
Thank you. Thank you, Marita, for inviting me to the space, for activating me in a way. Um,
Hmm.
because I firstly want to thank you for the work that you are giving, the medicine um, that you're giving to anyone and everyone who connects with your work, your energy, your space. It is necessary, and it was necessary for me to find your work. Like I said,
Hmm.
I found your work. I found your space, your presence on probably Facebook, and I just remember asking myself, like, universe, I need teachers to come along because I'm trying to go somewhere and I
Hmm.
can't get there on my own. And so, yes, thank you for this space. Thank you for continuing to hold this space, and I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. It makes me continue, despite how challenging it can be. So I'm glad that the space met you where you needed to be met, and so it's an honor because we have an opportunity in this life at times to walk with people, for a season, depending how long that is. And as I was telling you earlier, I always say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and it comes in different forms and in the capacity and capability that we are ready for, So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to enter slowly and with in good relationship. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So on this path that you have been on, this journey of self in relation to the all, in your own words, when we sit with the stories of our ancestors and lands and beads and stones and bones and shell and trees and the names of our family and how we weave them together on this path that we call life, can you, in your own words, describe what and who and all of the in between, what your creation story is and how it has made you you?
Mm, okay. Again, I love this phrasing, like this idea of what is your creation story, because I think it's important for us, like, not, oh, where are you from, where you're born, but more so, what is your creation story? Because now it's asking you, at least it's in my mind, it's asking me to activate, to reach beyond just me. My creation story, probably like many Black and Afro Latino people who are in the Americas, began um, in Africa, of course. A lot of my heritage, as I've discovered, comes out of the Congo.
Mm.
Uh, a lot of my heritage also comes out of, when I looked at it, it was, I believe, Scotland and
Mm.
uh, Germany. But I don't particularly follow too deeply into the European aspects of my origins.
Mm.
But what interests me more is what we call the continent. So a lot of Black people call Africa, not a lot, but there are some of us who are of the Black diaspora who call Africa the continent.
Hmm.
So on the continent, my origins mostly are in the Congo, a little bit in Senegal, I believe. I was reading about the Dogon, but that's not Senegal. I can't remember the part of Western Africa. So, and as we know, Africans, for a multitude of reasons, different African tribes were human trafficked.
Hmm.
So, along the trade routes, my ancestors went to Charleston, South Carolina, as well as Panama and Trinidad.
Hmm.
And the deepest connection I have is mostly to Charleston, and a little bit within the Caribbean. I kind of more aware of those histories. And so my great grandparents, for whatever reason, found their way into the States and then found their way to New York City. And along I came in the Bronx,
Hmm.
which is land originally by indigenous. I think it's the Lenape. I do want to acknowledge that that is their land. And so I grew up in New York City, and I grew up around a lot of different ethnicities. It was a very cool experience. And so my mother's side is where I have a lot more connection and information. My father's side, not so much. Unfortunately, that relationship has never flourished the way that I would have liked, despite what I feel like is me trying. So that is a history that I may not get in this lifetime.
Hmm.
But you know, love him to death. Love him not to death, but love him, as a being. So yeah, my origin stories. I really enjoy that question, or I love the way that you ask that question.
It's just such an opportunity for reflection. And as we reflect and remember, we can start weaving, those threads of who you are. And your creation story changes, every time, if I asked you in 5 minutes or at the end or tomorrow, it'll change. And I think that's what's so beautiful because it really shows you what indigenous spaces are about, what talk story is about, that things are supposed to grow, change, and evolve as we embody it based on the environment that we are in deep relationship to. So, yes, what an amazing journey and story. And I'm curious, as being someone who came from a big city setting. I was born in Mexico City, and I actually really find New York comforting. A lot of people don't. um, how was or how has access to diversity played a role in your work, in your development as a being, and also how you offer that to the world?
Firstly, I guess it's just me being me. um, City is wonderful. I love New York. Woo, wouldn't live there again just because I've traveled across the world, but I loved it in terms of my origin.
Mhm.
It is still highly segregated. We do have to acknowledge that.
Mm.
Uh, but there is still spaces where you're going to interact more with people of different origins, different stories, different ethnicities, different ancestries. And because of that, I met friends. I have friends from Trinidad. I have friends from Guyana, which is in South America.
Mhm.
I have friends who are from China, or they're immigrant. They're first generation, second generation, from China, Peru, and so that got me curious. And my mother, as we are particularly right now, transiting in Aquarius,
Mm.
as astrology can sometimes will say. Um, and so having a mother who's an Aquarius, she's always been very progressive. So, and she's always been very curious. So she always had us doing things, interacting in the community. And I think that that made me curious about the world. And
Mm.
I did get to a point where I was like, I've got to get out of this city. Like, it, it's wonderful. The diversity is so wonderful, but then you're just like, wow, if this is New York City, then like, what does the rest of the world look like? And so I think that that has informed New York City, this big city. And I will say, I love Mexico City. Like, I love Mexico City. I love just the energy. Um, I spent some time there. I spent about 6 months in Mexico City. Mexico City is a different. I feel comfort there. I feel I like Mexico City more than New York City, but that's just me. um. So yes, the diversity has informed, I think, how I see the world, how I think about the world, how I move through the world, how I show up in occupy space. It has allowed me to really, I think, explore my life and what I desire. And so once I left New York City, I was like, I gotta travel. I gotta see the world. And so I started traveling, especially after completing my nursing degree, a nursing degree. I've been doing nursing for about a decade now. And I just started seeing the world, and then it informs the work that I've done as a doula, as a death end of life doula, and as a registered nurse. The diversity, just being around so many different people, and also it has informed like my exploration of my roots. Like, okay, I wanted to know more about Panama. I wanted to know more about Trinidad, and learning about the not only Panama, but then like the roots of human trafficked Africans who have ancestry now in Panama, and um, learning about the different like Black African tribes that were down there, meeting other Black people in the diaspora, learning about the Garifuna in Belize. I forget the particular name. There's another group that's similar kind of origins that are in Panama. The name escapes me at the moment, but um, this diversity has just, if I had to do it again, I would do it again. In terms of like my origin story, because it has made my life so colorful. You know,
Yep.
this it made my life so colorful, so rich, so complex, so tender. Um,
Mm.
to hold all of that. So yeah.
Mm. I love how you said, I was also thinking like it's also more delicious because you get to eat all different kinds of food.
Uh,
But I love the word tender, how our curiosity and our willingness to engage with spaces that are different from us can instead of provoking fear, right? Or I need to be able to figure this out, or I need to be able to dominate. Like, how can I be tender? How can I allow myself my own tenderness of and be okay with who I am, even in the unknown.
mm,
You said something else that I really kind of want to explore if you're open to it. And that's just how you talked about how you have learned how you occupy space. And I find that really like curious because you are in a position, and, as a death doula, like how do you occupy space when you are helping people transition? What does that look like, right? Especially if they come from a background that's not yours, with stories that are not yours. I would, if you're willing to talk about that,
mm,
I'd love to hear that.
okay. For me, the phrase occupying space is something that I've thought about a lot because I am, I guess here in the West, we would call it trans. In other cultures, there's a multitude of beautiful names. I love the sort of Polynesian and Southeast Asian and sort of like Singapore and Malaysia, where there's, and even Hawaii and other places where there's a multitude of names. But in this particular moment in the West, I would be termed trans
Mhm.
or non-binary, but more so trans. For me, trans feminine, trans woman. So I've always had to sort of consider, as I was growing up in New York City, despite it being diverse, it may not have always been the most mentally diverse. And so as you grow up and you're being told you're not the right kind of human
Mm.
for this particular culture, you start to examine yourself and you start to look at the world. And so, and then as I went into therapy to understand who I was, a friend, I love the queer, black, of color, Latino community that I've always had access to and been with because they've always pointed me in the right directions. I remember a friend of mine was like, maybe you need to see a gender therapist. I saw them. And so I started to think about how am I occupying space? And
Mm.
then, as you start to, unravel white supremacy, being black, all of it,
Mhm.
you think about how you are moving in space. How do you show up? How do your words carry? How does your energy carry when you're in a room? What are the micro reactions of people's bodies, people's facial expressions, even just people's sort of, kind of moving their purse a little bit, or a man who's like, oh, I'm not sure if that's a man or a woman, and they're kind of like going through a sort of crisis and sometimes so that's what I mean about how you take up space or how you exist in space. And so that has all informed my work as an end of life doula, as a death doula, because you have to hold many things. Sometimes I'm showing up to a space where we may have had a client. I don't like to use that word, but the individual or the family that is deciding to connect with the work that I'm doing and the offerings, we might have a conversation like over the phone or over Zoom or some sort of platform, and then like there's that, and then there's me in person.
Mhm.
And right now, my deepest desire is to start to engage more with more people of color. Being in the SoCal area, a lot of the clients that have reached out, and maybe this is spirit asking me to do my work within, and I do understand it because a lot of the clients that have reached out tend to be white bodies. And so that's triggering for me
Mhm.
because I have to think about how I hold space because I do have a lot of trauma that has come down from the culture that we have all been born into.
Mhm.
And so I have to show up to this space, and sometimes I might be seeing something or hearing something, and my first reaction is, and I want to say this appropriate, or I want to say this with as much care because I might have a knee jerk reaction like, oh, white people.
Mhm.
And having to pull that back and say, okay, these people come with their own ancestry. These people come with their own origin story. These people come with, they also cannot help that they have been born with white bodies. They have been born under the label of white. So if you're going to do this work, you have to make um, you have to resolve some things around your distrust of white bodies, of white. So then, or even showing up to spaces where some of the family members don't even know that I am trans.
Mm-hmm.
And women, feminine beings, the feminine is always more receptive, where I can sometimes sense a man or the masculine, or for lack of a better term or phrase, where I can always sense sometimes there's definitely a lot more resistance when engaging with men. But then uh, thinking about how I exist in space makes me also just address that people are complex. And so it makes the work of being a doula, a death doula. I think I've been doing that since I was probably 6. My great grandmother, she had a stroke when I was like 6, and then it was kind of like downhill from there. And I remember spending a lot of time with her, and she was like confused and sort of like dementia. And I remember just sort of like, waking up sometimes and say, we called her Grandma Alice, and Grandma Alice, do you want, so like I was with her through her transition from this realm into the next. And so, yeah, that existing in space is important because it makes the work of being a death doula tender.
Mm.
It makes the work of confronting grief and witnessing grief in all of its. I think grief is a really beautiful thing.
Yep.
I think grief is beautiful. I think that death is beautiful. Personally, I'm biased. I think death is more beautiful than birth, but that's just me. um, because there's something, even though like it's frightening, like as a death doula, I get frightened by death. I'm frightened. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die one day. Oh my God, I'm not going to be here. Oh my goodness. Wow. But in all of that, then it makes me think, all right, Malu. Okay, Malu. So, what are you doing? What are you saying? Is what you're about to say going to help or hinder or hurt? Okay, Malu, what, so that existing in space and then the work, allowing that to connect with my work as a doula, death doula, I think it's important to consider how you move in space, how you show up, how you exist in space.
You know, as we continue this beautiful weaving, it comes to mind, a lot of explanation that I have to create for people about Indigenous circles, is just one step, right? And then when I tell them the next, like, this is a queer space, and more specifically, this is a trans space, I get a lot of like, oh, yeah, sure, and I'm like, no, but that is why it's different. And that's why it allows you to transform different, right? Queer spaces aren't trying to make, non-queer people queer, but I think there is, as you said, a tenderness to trans spaces because you've had to go through that process of who am I? Who am I truly? How do I take up space? How do I not? What is being told who I am? And really reach that point of self sovereignty. And you have a name that has that medicine of sovereignty. So let's talk about sovereignty and that journey of discovering that you're a sovereign being. Indigenous spaces, by who they are, because of the culture, because of the connection, right, to land and to ancestors. In the teachings that I come from, you're a sovereign being. You have value and you have worth because you're a creature of Mother Earth. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have colonization, that structure of creating value. And I don't think people understand how it has seeped into everything and how it goes multiple generations back, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it takes time to recognize it in your thought process and your DNA. And so, what is that journey, or have you seen for your own sake, discovering your sovereignty or reclaiming it, I would say, and earning that name? Because, when you're given a name, you're given a journey. It's like you know, here's your name. You know, everyone's like, oh, I want a native name. I'm like, it's not like, it's like, are you really asking for that? Because then you're asking literally, this is the journey that I want to have. You know, and as someone who, you know, one who catches lightning got electrocuted, you know, a couple of weeks ago, twice, not fun, right? But it's in the name. So let's talk about this journey of tender sovereignty and anywhere you want to you know, swim with
Yeah.
this.
So I need to sort of reframe what you were saying in terms of the name, the origins and the tenderness around that, and the weaving of that. Malu-Kanoa. Um, Firstly, I will say again, when I was just one day, because I have these moments. I'll be in the car and I'll be crying about something. I'm like, universe, like I just need this. I need it. I was like, I need teachers. I need someone. I can't, And then I remember seeing Path of Ish, and then I was like, oh, interesting. I saw the colors, and I clicked on the podcast, and right, and then you said, I'm Marita, one who catches lightning. But like in your sort of, I love the way your voice and the slow medicine of the podcast, like, not you're not rushing through it. I really enjoy, because it reminds me and it tells me that in order to get the teachings, in order to experience the medicine, we have to slow down. So when I heard Marita, one who catches lightning, I said, you need to learn. It's time to learn. And so, in terms of, like, when you said that, it opened the space for me to consider my name again,
Mm,
just a meaning. So I was given a name at birth that was just my mother being who she was. She was young, and she was finding her way as an 18-year-old around the streets of New York. And she gave me a name that was very biblical. It's a very strong name. And that name carried me so that I could bear witness to who I really am.
mm,
Like, in the spaces being trans, someone being, and people and communities being queer and trans, we have had to face, who am I? And I think that what I have had to, and I've said this more so in my dating life than I have maybe to community, but I've definitely said to cis heterosexual men, your fear of the world, knowing that you might be queer, is what might actually be holding you back from discovering your sovereignty and
mm,
who you are. So the name Malu-Kanoa, Maluhia, from what I have read and talked to other indigenous Hawaiian people, but again, I stand to be corrected, because that's just how it is. Maluhia means peace, peaceful. So then Malu, in some ways I've read, was more so along the lines of protected and sovereign. And then Kanoa. So the Kanoa was the first name that started. And I was trying to understand myself and what I wanted. And there was an album called A Seat at the Table by Solange. If you guys know Beyonce,
mm-hmm. Big
she
Beyonce
has a sister.
fans.
Yes. I'm as I mature, as my psyche, as my wisdom matures, Beyonce is cool. But there are things prettier than Beyonce. There's the poet. I forget her name, but she has a book called "There Are Things Prettier Than Beyonce."
Mm,
Solange, her sister, has a particular, what do you call this? Like when the songs are transitioning, and it says, "Do nothing without intention.
Yep.
Do nothing without intention." And that would always echo in my head as I was on my journey. And Kanoa came because I was standing in the mirror and I was struggling at the time with my gender. And I'm standing there, I'm like crying. I'm a mess in the mirror. I was braiding my hair at the time, putting in like cornrows, and I'm crying and boo-hooing. And I'm just like, Spirit, like, I can't keep living like this. Like, I was at work and someone was like, Sir. And I was like, Ooh, I don't know about that.
Mhm.
And I was like, I want to be free. Like,
Mm.
I want to be free. I want to be liberated from these different, like, manufactured or these traumas, these boxes. So, Kanoa, I reached into culture, and the one that I had more access to was Hawaiian culture. So as I started to read about the history of Hawaii and the people, and meeting other people who were from Hawaii who were trans, and so it was a place and a somewhere where I felt safe enough, and I said, okay. And then Kanoa came, which means one who is free.
Mhm.
And then time went on, and I was like, "Ooh, there's something me. There's something else." I believe that names are sacred magic.
Mhm.
Names are high magic, and so Malu came, and when I saw that it meant sovereign, and that's for my particular inner journey. I want to be my inner purpose. I want to be sovereign in my being, sovereign to know myself when I'm in spaces, and sovereign enough to allow myself to change and to be taught and to learn. Sovereign enough where I'm no longer people pleasing. I'm no longer, you know, so the name came because before this, I was people pleasing.
Mm.
I was in relationships that were disembodying, and I had to basically I threw most of my old journey away, or I left it. I ran off, probably like many Westerners. I ran off to Peru in the jungles and found myself with plant medicines that now that I'm older and I'm more under, I feel like in some ways I should have done a little bit more research. It did change my life, but the reverence to it, the true understanding that I have now, I have a lot more respect for plant medicines. But that started the internal revolution, and so Malu-Kanoa is sitting here today. And maybe the name will change. I don't know. I think that more people should. I think our parents should give us a name to get us on our journey, but at a particular point, I do think that we should reach a place where maybe it changes,
Mhm. Mhm.
so that we can begin to embody that. And maybe, it'd be interesting if there are cultures where people's names change over the course of their life.
There are. There are, and it's funny because, well, it's not funny. I mean, it's something, but it's just, this opportunity. It's almost like as we enter into this high magic, right, of naming things, we we are embarking on a journey, right? Not to define it. A name isn't supposed to define it and keep it stagnant, but you grow, change, and evolve. And I come from traditions that you have names that are public, you have names that are private, you have the name that you're earning, you have the name that you're discovering, and I love this journey that you're talking about, and something that stood out for me that I really connected to. I mean, I connected to all of it. I'm loving every bit of this. Is that call to come with intention. And that is, I was in Australia, where we have a good community there. So I travel there to, cut down on carbon footprint. Easier for one person to go than several to come here. And when I was sitting with Indigenous people there, and I asked permission, and they gave me permission to do ceremony, and opened up our ceremonial space for us. One of the things that they said is like, come with intention. And it stuck with me. I hadn't heard those words in that way, with that resonance. We have used other words. And so I love that you said that come with intention. And I want to just kind of swim in that a little bit. How can you, in your own words and imagery, describe what that means to come with intention?
To come with intention means to ask ourselves why we are here, why we are doing what we are doing, saying what we are saying, giving what we are giving. Is it for the ego? Is it for the good of people? And if and am I in alignment with what is going on? Because there are moments where I've been in spaces and I said, do nothing without intention. And maybe I had been asked to lead a space and I had to say, oh no, you know what? Even though I have good intentions, or I believe I have good intentions, do nothing without intention means, am I supposed to be doing this? And so then stepping back and saying, oh no, 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 no. And so then I have to say, okay, well, like I've been asked. There was a particular point, for instance, I was asked to teach, not teach, but well, yeah, I was asked to lead a course for training end of life doulas. And at first I was really excited about it. And I was like, oh my God, yes, like this is so great. Like, I get to like spread more knowledge. And so then as I sat with it and I sat with the intention, I was like, what is your intention? What do you want to teach? Why do you want to teach? Why do you want to teach? What do you want to teach? What do you want people to know and gain and leave and move with and depart with once they have left the space? And I couldn't answer those questions, so I had to back away from that opportunity because I'm like, wait, there's still stuff that I want to learn before I begin teaching. There's experience that I still want to have before I begin teaching. And maybe I still would have maybe have been a good teacher, but and especially in my work as a doula, end of life doula, and as someone who is more and more journeying down a spiritual path, and knowing that this may be my life, this may be my life work, this may be maybe like intention is important because I'm like, I don't want to show up to this space and I'm out here teaching, and I know that the work of death, the work of transition is important work, especially living in Western cultures that have very little relationship to death and in the tenderness and the beauty of it. So intention is important because there are people sometimes that are teaching, that are, and I'm, you've heard me say this on my page on social media. There are people teaching wisdoms and technologies that I don't think have asked themselves, what is my intention for serving this medicine? What is my intention for giving this medicine, this knowledge, this indigenous wisdom, this indigenous technology? Because it's scary sometimes to live in a world where people don't move with intention and they get a hold of knowledge and then they weaponize it, and there's so much healing that could be had in this world, but someone is charging $15,000 for 3 days. So the intention is important because and it's about respect. So I can't intentionally sit in space and intention. Do I have permission? Do I even have permission? Like like you said before, do I have permission to do this, to teach this, to give this knowledge? Like, yes, a curandero or curandera may have shared this with me, but it may have been shared for me. And is it intentional? If the intention is there, did this community of people, because I've spent time in Brazil, in Peru, in Ecuador, with indigenous communities who have given me a lot of knowledge, but I never got permission to go out and teach the information. Because again, if I'm out here teaching this information, am I teaching it a way in where it's being distilled in a way that is respectful and that is in reverence to these communities that, like we have said, are being genocided, even as we are running down to the retreats? So intention is really important because we can harm people and not even realize it.
So much there, so powerful. And what a beautiful way to be able to walk with deep intention and with that ability to stay curious and not have to become an expert, you know, to enter into a space as an expert, to truly leave your wisdom at the door. And what a journey you have been on. As the world is grieving, as the world is grieving, and again, Western culture does not know how to grieve, what are some ways, some knowledge, some of your own learned wisdom that you can share to help people learn how to grieve, other than, of course, connecting with you? Um,
Yeah. Mm. Well, um, I'm a student of grief. I'm a student of this path, so I'm still learning. I think that one of the things that I have done in my journey with grief, because we are grieving right now as, excuse me, as systems, there's so much beauty in grief. I think that we have to tap into the beauty of grief. Grief, when you feel it in your body. Feel the way in which it manifests in your body. Slow down at work and take a deep breath. And acknowledge I'm grieving.
mm,
To me, grief is just a part of life. We wouldn't be human if we didn't grieve. We wouldn't respect each other if we didn't grieve. We wouldn't respect this earth mothership if we didn't grieve. The fall comes, you grieve. Oh, the light is getting shorter. And you grieve to slow down. You grieve. Grief is part of who we are as community. Grief allows love. Grief is sometimes, as one of my teachers would say, is the other side of love. grief, like, get in your body. If I can leave any kind of wisdom, feel that grief. If you feel like you're coming undone, if you feel like, especially in this time, you feel like you're coming undone, you're losing it, everything's, you just, that's, understand that that's normal. Your heart is working. Your humanness, your connectedness to all things animated, all the plants, the animals, the rocks, the ocean, the rivers, the bees, the air, the sky, this planet, like it, grief is integral to who we are. And in dance, sometimes when I'm grieving, I dance. I get, I dance. Sometimes when I'm in the car, sometimes my grief, like if you've ever seen images of Kali, the Hindu goddess, um, I have her on my altar, and sometimes, it's even like the facial expressions that she makes. I do that. You stick your tongue out. Sometimes the grief is I need to, like, you know how cats do the hissing thing? Sometimes I do that as a, like, to kind of get it out.
Yep.
But I think making space for grief in your life, grief rituals, you know, I give grief at least 2 times a month, new moon and full moon. And then when I write in my journal, I write about what am I grieving? I'm grieving this, I'm grieving that. And sometimes grief is good. I'm moving to a new apartment. I'm going to miss my old one,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm. So beautiful, um, as I sit with your words and your rhythm and your way of being and how it really allows people space. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for sharing your process, your journey, who you are as someone who is truly weaving and becoming medicine. And I've learned so much, and it's good to be with someone who is so open to talking about space and path and weaving and taking that time. So as we move through this space and time and this conversation, where can people find you? How can they connect with you? What's the best way so that they can find ways? And because I know you have spaces that are open on your Instagram, and what's a good way to connect with you so people can walk with you?
Well, it is an honor if people, bodies, individuals, spirits decide to connect. My email is Malu the doula, MALU the doula at gmail.com. Malu the doula. I'm also on Instagram. My Instagram is of Earth and Seed. It has origins with Octavia Butler. She wrote a book. She was a black sci-fi writer. And she kind of talks about like water and seeds. And so anyway, it sort of comes out of that origin, but it's of Earth and Seed, of underscore Earth dot and underscore seed. So of underscore Earth dot and underscore seed. So type in Earth and Seed. Um, I'm sure it'll likely just hopefully come up in the sort of search. But those are right now particular spaces that you can connect with me. Those who are accessing your work, and also this podcast can also, I believe my website is yes, maluthedoula.com. That is another space where I have put in work and offerings. So I just, again, really want to thank you, Marita,
Mhm.
for this space and this medicine. And I'm definitely leaving this space kind of thinking about some other things. So thank you.
Thank you for your time, for your journey, for your space, and for your medicine. And I'm excited to find more ways where you and I can connect. And I hope that we'll be in another circle soon, sooner than later, my friend. So, with that,
I
yeah, I'd like to also thank all your ancestors and the people in the land that has nurtured and held you, that land, the continent that you come from, the land that's nurturing you now, and deep bow to them, to those seeds, those bones, those stones, those seeds of earth. Shade. Thank you. Once again, it is with deepest gratitude that I bow to you for joining me on this podcast, this episode, this circle, this plática, this meditation, this remembering. I hope that you have stayed curious. I hope to see you in the circle again next week. So make sure that you like or follow. Until then, may you be blessed with abundance of peace and radical self-love.